I mean, why not, right? If anybody actually shows up, cool. If they don't, well, then that's less cool. We'll see if anybody shows up. So it's terrible, right? Like, everybody hated it. That's what I'm figuring. Everyone in chat's just like... Meanwhile, we cut to a shot of Evo's hand, which is just this kind of shriveled, broken thing. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, Eva says she's just doing this at this point. Like, okay, there we go. Oh, Jesus Christ. So yeah, I do hope y'all enjoyed. One of the things I wanted to talk about in the pre-stream was I was going to mention one of the biggest reasons why I go out of my way to not allow the actors to see any part of the finished product until we're there, other than very strategically chosen hints and teasers. It's a whole mentality thing. I actually told this to Evo before. There's actually two big reasons. The first reason is because I tend to prefer to do a lot of that work by myself because of just basic logistics and production lines. It's a lot harder than you'd think to handle a multimedia project across essentially the internet, especially when you don't have a dedicated server or cloud specifically for that purpose. So that's the first problem. But the second problem, and substantially more of a thing, is I like... How do I explain this? I like those moments. If you've written anything or drawn anything or made anything, you probably know what I mean by those moments. It's when someone, for the first time, plays, or watches, or reads, or listens to, or views your work, and they're just like... And they're like blown away by it, either because they didn't see it coming, or they didn't see the result of it, or it gets like an emotional reaction, you know, those kind of things. Yeah, that feeling, that moment of just... And I very much... this is admittedly a little bit pragmatic, but considering the fact that, statistically speaking, most of the theaters and rewrites don't have much of an audience outside of the typical audience, and of course, the people who helped make it, one of the goals is to make sure that even the people who helped make it that have something to watch, right? You see your tiny little sliver, your minuscule little sliver here of the project, so that when you, literally, the actors and artists involved can actually see the finished product, you can be like, just like everybody else. I am glad you chose to watch it, Evo. Evo was thinking that people would say that her art sucked. Yeah, Evo was wrong. Evo is incorrect, I think is how I'm going to phrase that. By the way, a very minor point, Mr. Red. In the middle, you said something. And I forget what you said, or rather, I didn't see what you said. Like, you were like, hear me out, here's an idea. And then you never said anything, because YouTube's live chat is garbage. And then people started reacting to whatever it is you said. I never saw what you said, so I was wondering what you said. I hate YouTube's chat. One of the 3 biggest reasons why I don't stream on YouTube is because the chat program for streaming on YouTube is utter crap. It's very frustrating. Thank you, Cookie Dude. I will put that towards Xenogears. Somewhere. Where did I put those? Here they are. Here we go. Xenogears. The other 2 reasons? Well, first of all, you know what? I don't want to get into it. So I'm not going to. Humans are game devs. Demons are angry gamers. Angels are crap management. See, I don't like that. one of the big points, one of the major thematic goals with the work is to make it very, very clear that the angels were not evil. If you, I know this is going to sound strange, if you watched the Tor run, you may have noticed, and that was a while ago. That's how old that idea is. It was something we were talking about when we were questing on Hoth specifically. Is it was a mandatory point that the angels are not evil. It's just so easy and so honestly done. Like, I'm so sick of the thing that the angels are evil. It's like, no, we're not doing that. The high heavens are not, yeah, exactly. The high heavens are not evil. They're different. The whole idea is that they are structured differently. I talked so much about the robot thing and the programming, and several people noticed in chat, I noticed, that several of the angels were acting in ways where their programming was just conflicting with what they were running into. Even Tyrael, who wasn't actually an angel anymore by the end of the work, still was confined to angelic think, was still patterned in the same process. And so even Tyrael, when faced with an unexpected situation and not being sure what exactly to do about it, was like, I need to get back to the plan. I need to get back to the plan. How do I get back to the plan? I've got it. Got it. But that was something Lunarith can tell you about this, because I hammered this point in over and over and over in the direction video, but also when I was talking to her about it. Ariel needed to not sound villainous. And a lot of people were doing takes on Ariel, and several people were, even some of Lunarith's lines were sounding like a villain, and it's like, no. She needs to sound sympathetic and understanding and kind. She needs to sound like a good guy. Yeah, and she's a gentle guide who's just like, this is what must be. This is what do. I will do what I can for you. And so it was a whole thing. And I was smashing the point over and over. I know this sounds like a weird thing for me to recommend, but I recommend you rewatch that a couple of times. Because something... So, my sister makes fun of me for this all the time. She says I'm too subtle in my writing. I'm not... I don't apologize for that, but I tend to have a very common trend of establishing points just in casual dialogue. There's a lot of world building that goes on throughout our Diablo, and most of it is established in just people casually mentioning something like they would in character, rather than turning to the screen and saying, "Did you know?" Stuff like that. It's one of the things I actually bothered to point out in chat while we were going through it, is how the followers of Zakarum are consistently nice, kind, understanding, and respectful to everybody because they're followers of Zakarum. Stuff like that. How to do a lore run of our Diablo? I could. Had it all up here. Anyway, so speaking of which, if anybody has any questions about our Diablo, this is a great time for it. Thank you, Rex. And I actually agree with you. Speaking as someone on the other side of that, someone who's usually analyzing those little touches, I love putting those little touches into a work. Now, Lynette had a question. Did Tyrael never know Ariel was killed by the party? Oh no, he totally knew. It's just that was kind of part of the plan. I even bothered to have this tiny little line by Cassia, I believe, who mentions that Tyrael seemed disinterested in explanations. The idea was, and I want you to picture the scene for a moment, as Tyrael shows up and the party's like, oh god, because they've killed Ariel. Like, oh, what do we do? So Cassia, leader, walks up saying, Tyrael, we have ill news. And Tyrael's just like, Later. Tyrael, so what Tyrael and Lilith's original plan was to get the Black Soulstone, use it as a bit of a temporary small-scale imbuement thing. There's other layers to that, which I won't bore you with right now, but the relevant point is it needed to contain the essences and powers of as many angels, large-scale angels, and large-scale demons as possible. So Ariel being essentially sacrificed to the stone alongside Malthael and Iswal was considered acceptable. Nobody could do the line right, killing you. Okay. Everybody thought it was funny, but first, I'm sorry, really quick. Thank you, Tim. As always, if you want to put that towards something, let me know. It's okay. I appreciate it. I really do, Tim. Same as before. I'm sorry. Please remind me. So the plan went through like 4 iterations throughout the course of the story. One of the things I was deliberately playing with is I was playing with the audience's average expectation of bad writing. What I mean by that is, how many times have you ever watched a show or a movie or a game where someone, I'll get back to the F-bomb in a second, where someone just knows something and reacts to something that they shouldn't know, and you just go with it because you know, you're the audience, right? We've actually talked about this as a narrative problem in D3, right? Like the audience, the characters just kind of go with it because the audience is already aware, so obviously you should just go with it, that kind of a thing, right? But if you're paying attention, Tyrael knew a lot more than he should. And he consistently would do things which was just kind of carefully and precisely pushing the party exactly where they needed to go. I even tried to make it quiet. Like, for example, Hakan is the one who, while freaking out over the jungle, while comforting Jeffrey, who is freaking out over the loss of his home, and how cursed and horrible his home has become, Hakan is the one who casually mentions that Tyrael was talking about regrouping at some Pandemonium Fortress or whatever. Now, why would Tyrael ever say that they should go there? Of course, the answer is because Zul, who is working for Tyrael, is already there, having infiltrated Diablo's followers, and that's where they need to go next. So the reason they're going to Pandemonium is specifically because Diablo's there, not because of Pandemonium. Just little stuff like that. There's a lot of moments where Tyrael just kind of kept just quietly pushing everything forward. But yeah, so the original plan. The original plan is actually stated almost outright. They talk about charging into the heavens. The idea was okay, let me rewind a second here. Let me talk about the goal rather than the plan, because the goal is more important. Do you remember Tyrael's initial entry? By the way, I'm actually curious. How many of you noticed that Tyrael's name changed color? Lilith's is probably more obvious, but Tyrael's name changes color between the beginning and when he starts showing up in the main party. Anyways, so at the very beginning, Tyrael gives this big speech about dreary Tyrael and how much he hates his job, and how rote it is. And honestly, I was worried I was being too obvious about it, because that's his motivation. He's sick of it. Everything has been doing this forever, and oh my god, this is just... So we need to change it. We need to change the status quo utterly and fundamentally. Now, another side little tidbit there, and I was very quiet about this, but Lilith was the very first person to discover Sanctuary by complete accident. So Lilith discovered Sanctuary, and is like, oh, this is a cool place. Hangs out for a bit, actually a couple of years, before finally being like, all right, I should go report it to my boss, Mephisto. So she reports into Mephisto, and he goes there. He's like, oh, this is great. And they start doing their things, and then they leave. Lilith has never left Sanctuary. In fact, Lilith never left Sanctuary. There's a couple of little tidbits that kind of indicate that as you go, especially because of the coincidence of the timing. Because the 3 usurpers go back to try and conquer the 4 lords of hell. They get kicked out because of the angels, essentially, and get banished back to Sanctuary. Lilith is still here. That's when the barrier goes up. And by this point, Tyrael and Lilith are both in Sanctuary, and that's how the two end up meeting. And both of them are like, this place is kind of awesome. Because if you've been paying attention to the timeline, and I don't blame you if you weren't, by this point, it's actually been several years that Tyrael and Lilith have both just been wandering Sanctuary, and they like what they see. So if you remember that map at the very beginning, hey Gary, at the very beginning, there's this map where you can just see the fabric, right? There's the 4 pillars, one in each corner, kind of stretching the fabric out. That's actually a plot point. And at the very, very, very middle is Sanctuary, and that's the whole idea. Planes of existence have cropped up and been dissolved across the fabric all the time. In fact, if you look at the wonderful map that Evo drew, there's actually several other planes that are in the middle of being consumed by one side or the other. But Sanctuary is a circle right in the center. That's the whole point. It is the actual combination of all of the primal forces. So it's unique, new, interesting. And so both Tyrael and Lilith are like, this. This is what it needs to be. And so that's the overall goal. They need to deal with the high heavens in a permanent fashion, deal with the hells in a permanent fashion, and do that essentially however they can. So that's the intent. It's the motive of the villains, and will be a rather major point in our Diablo 2, which, yes, I was constantly dropping sequel hints for. I apologize for that. I feel like I was being way too overt with some of those. They needed to anchor Sanctuary in the middle, but they also wanted Sanctuary to expand, was one of the original ideas. And so there's some stuff going into that. I don't want to spoil too much because this is going to be a big thing in our Diablo 2. But let's just say they need to deal with the pillars, because the fact that the fabric is so stretched is not good. Also, if you've been paying attention, and you know what? Can I just pull it up? Hang on. I'm just going to pull it up. Give me a second. Just gonna do this really quick. Sorry, give me one moment, because I just want to show you what I'm talking about. This lovely, lovely map, which Evo gets all the credit for. There it is. This is a large file, so this might take a second. There we go. So yeah, there's Sanctuary right in the middle. Nice big circle. Oh yeah, another minor lore tidbit, which I don't think anybody would even care about. The closer you are to the middle of the fabric, the more mountainous your terrain, because of the nature of how the fabric operates. The further you are, the more flat it is. That's why Mount Ariad is at the dead center, or at least it's supposed to be. This is a little stylized, but you get the idea. So you see the hells up here, right? You can also see the Four Lords' castles from here. But if you notice, there's something odd. Like, the heavens, there's no real landmarks there. There's just the pattern. And it's so much larger than the hells. This is part of the greater meta-narrative that's going on here. The heavens have been winning. More and more planes, like this one down here, have been getting consumed and absorbed and assimilated into the high heavens. The high heavens is bigger, and that's destabilizing the crap out of everything. So there's more going on here, but you get the idea. Also, I don't think she did this on purpose, but I don't care. We have an Order dragon and a Chaos dragon over here. So this is Chaos down here. This is this is Order. It's good, and this is evil. And there's, like I said, I don't want to give away too much. But the four pillars are going to be a primary focus of our Diablo 2. Oh. I love that artwork. You overdid yourself, Evo. See, this is why, after I take over the world, I'm just going to set her up for life, just as a thank you for this. Why are angels orderly? That's a very good question. Part of the problem is visually this isn't actually quite accurate. This is a little more representative than literal. Because actually the high heavens isn't this real corner. The high heavens is this entire side over here. All the way down from order to good. But even when I kind of talked this back and forth a little bit and we did some test sketches, it just looked terrible. So, since this whole map is stylized anyways, we decided to just anchor heavens on good and hell on evil, because hell actually does the same. Hell kind of stretches across good and chaos, because it is composed of both. In reality, this is actually funny, in reality the pillars are actually the physical things. You could see the damn things, and they're out several miles-ish, which I know isn't actually that long, from the edge of the fabric. Now, Evo asked this, I'm going to go ahead and give this away, because what happens if you fall off the fabric, or into the fabric? Well, it's very simple. So let's say, we'll use a direct example. Mr. Red. Mr. Red, who is extremely evil and chaotic, falls in. But what do you think? Is Mr. Red more evil or more chaotic? Because it actually matters. More evil. Okay, so Mr. Red falls into, like, the fabric around the desert, which would be right about there. What will happen now is because he is no longer anchored onto something approximating physics, he will get dragged towards the pillar which most resonates with him, or more accurately, vice versa. He most resonates with evil. So he will slowly be dragged all the way up into that pillar, and then absorbed into that pillar and dissoluted, because, and I mentioned this earlier, the pillars are the origination of sentience and sapience and intelligence, whereas the fabric is the origination of all the other aspects of physics and life and function. So, Mr. Red goes, ah, and is gone, is effectively cessated into the chaos, or the evil pillar, excuse me. Same thing with all four of them. If you're more chaotic, if you're more good, if you're more orderly, it's whichever one is more. I know what you're thinking. What happens if you are somehow magically equal to everything? Then unpleasant things happen, because then you get ripped apart. But yes, the egg, so this is a realm being consumed by the hells here. You can actively see it being distended as the balance is being ripped apart and is slowly being dragged in there. And over here we have actually two realms being consumed into the heavens. Also, I don't know if I want to give that away. I put a lot of thought into the cosmology, because that's the writing style. I told you, I start with the bedrock, how things operate. The pillars are going to be a very central plot point of our Diablo 2, though, I'll tell you that right now. Yeah, exactly, Kira White Noise. But again, this is all representative. So obviously, everything's all nice and human here, because they're in the very middle. And obviously humans are a perfectly balanced species. So, the idea here is that each other realm has completely different types of things in them. I only actually put real thought and effort into one of them. Let's see if I can find it. Because I actually already wrote up a whole thing about this. Looks like I can't. Oh god, what did I call them? Do you remember what we called them, Evo? I don't remember the name. I came up with it on the fly. Jeez. They're noise. They're audio elementals. They are comprised of sound. And so one of the swan, that's them, the swan. There they are. So here, do you mind if I read this? This is just completely unnecessary backstory. But, I mean, whatever. So the swan, obviously they're long gone. They've been absorbed into the hells a long time ago. But the swan were sound, and because of the nature of being sound, all of them were essentially always... Oh no, I wish I could draw this well. This is drawn by Evo in chat, Frisco. All of the swan are essentially constantly in a non-stop Discord. Imagine, if you will, an actual Discord server, okay? Except it has hundreds or thousands of different channels. But the thing is, they have the ability to perfectly and infinitely multitask in terms of communication. So they just talk across all of these different chat threads simultaneously. Make sense? So they're always chatting and talking and sharing and discussing with everyone else that they choose to do so. They obviously are not talking to literally everyone else at the same time. But one person could have an ongoing active conversation with like 500 other people at the same time. Now, that naturally means they're a little bit limited in what they can do, because they have limited capacity to physically interact with the world. So then they got absorbed by the Burning Hells. And what the Burning Hells did was they used a magical yoke in order to rein them all into a single force. One small little bubble. Now what this did, it allows the demons to go ahead and use them as a way to drag and to pull. It's basically, they've yoked them like you would an ox, right? They're always in pain in this state. They cannot hear or talk to anyone else in this state. And they constantly cause damage to everything around them. by being in this state. So if I'm not describing that properly, I want you to imagine a non-stop sound hurricane, which the demons can just unleash on a spot. And it's just going to absolutely destroy constantly everything around it. And I want you to imagine being in there and being from a species who is used to being able to talk to thousands or millions of people simultaneously, being completely alone, all of them. Also, the whole time you're in horrific pain. That's the kind of stuff that crops up on the other areas of the fabric. One moment, please. The idea would be that would be a boss fight in our Diablo 2, by the way. Because of course we're going to the Hells. I mean, what else can we do? The status quo has been irrevocably changed. Now what? So, if anybody has any direct questions about the ReWrite, this would be a great time for it. Or for the actors, several of whom are present right now. Also, if random, you're listening to me right now, you asked what the deadline is for auditions. Probably today. Yeah, I don't do gross. Which is funny, because if you're paying attention, I totally did gross in our Diablo 1. I just never showed it. Ritualistically strewn, such as to preserve his life. I think that sentence says all it needs to. How do I decide on the takes? I've been doing voice direction work for about 8 years. Practice. I don't have a better answer than that. Alright, I said to talk about the F-bomb. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not big on cussing, and so I tend to not cuss, god damn it! But as a direct consequence of that, this also bleeds over into my writing. I've always believed very firmly when it comes to writing that you need to use it as a very precise tool. If there's going to be a cuss, then it needs to be something you are using, precisely and particularly. Now, there's actually several ways to do that. Sorry, one moment again. There we go. It needs to have impact. The whole idea is for it to have impact. And so if you're paying attention, I actually did have one cuss in the Legend of Zelda theater and one in our Diablo. And I'm just going to go ahead and give this away. There's also one, actually there's two, in our FF1 as well. But it's always something I use very carefully and very precisely. So that line had to be that. It needed to be the impact immediately after the reveal that Tyrael is a bad guy. So that had to be the moment for that. And lots of people, like 13 people, auditioned for Zool. And I love y'all, but nobody could get the cuss right. It needed to have the exact right impact. It needed to sound just so. And nobody could do it. And so I just kept listening, and anybody who was involved in the project knows that Zool was the last character cast because I just couldn't get anybody, I couldn't get the exact performance I needed out of it. And so that was exactly the line I kept using, and people were like, no. No. Luneruth, actually, this amused me. Luneruth gave me, like, I think 10 takes in a row, and I'm just sitting there like... And Luneruth's a wonderful voice actress, but I just wasn't hearing it, and I'm just like, no. Killing You was finally the one who actually nailed it. I was like, okay, you. And the funny thing to me, though, is because the person who, the backup option, if I didn't get an actor, was going to be me. And I'm just like, because I just, that would be funny, right? I have to do that line because, anyways, that's whatever. Anyways, so I wanted Ariel done not evil, and you were the only one to do not evil. Kinda, yeah, Luneruth. You weren't the only one, I'm not gonna lie to you. I had two other actresses who also did a decent job of it. But one of the things that it comes to casting, this actually kind of ties into the Liar's Tales question, is let's say I have, there's a bit of calculus going on when it comes to casting. Because let's say I have 5 actors and 5 roles. You might think, oh, that's easy, right? No. Because let's say that these 2 actors both nail these 3 roles really well. So both of them would be really good for all 3 of these roles. But this person does this one really well, but this person does this one and this one really well. And this one does this one and this one and this one really well. And so now I have to not just decide who is the best actor for a given role, but I have to decide what other empty spots I have to fill too. And so I'm just staring at this and this, and I'm like, and usually they're not as neat as 5 to 5. Usually I have more like 13 and 37. So there's a lot of juggling that comes down to that. It's a whole process. I'm not looking forward to it today. So, a bit of a spoiler. Our Final Fantasy I has 6 main characters, and they have the overwhelming majority of dialogue across them. I didn't intend that, it's worth noting. Usually I write ensemble casts, like I did with our Diablo. But the more I was writing, the more it just became all about the 6 main characters. There are NPCs, there are other characters, but like, here, I'll pull it up right here, because I've got the file right here. I do word counts to let the actors know how much of a job they're in for. So like, for example, Garland in RFF1 has 207 lines, or words to him. The representative Apolline has 51. Sid has 205. The Merilith has 106. And the main character, Williams, who is the fighter, has 2,697. So, what I'm not looking forward to is casting those 6. I honestly feel like I have a sufficiently talented and awesome crew to fill out everything else. The other 31 roles will be no problem. But I'm really scared about those big 6, because those 6 are going to carry a huge amount of it. And yeah, we have such a talented crew, and I've only got 6 big roles. So I'm going to say this real quick, just super quick here. If you don't get a main 6 role, please do not actually be offended or hurt or upset about that. Please, please. The last thing I want is for someone, one of my wonderful and amazing actors, to be like, oh, I suck because you didn't get one of the main 6. There's only 6! There's only 6! There's only so much I can do. Oh, there's only so much I can do. It's just... But you don't have hair on your back, Kitsune Baba. It's off your leg. I should also mention, just while we're here, before I actually get to the second question, RFF1 is very different in our Diablo in terms of construction. Our Diablo, if you're paying attention, drifts back and forth between narrative and dialogue, sometimes in the same scene. And that's cool. But when I sat down to start writing RFF1, when I started actually doing this, I know, Rex, when I started doing the scripting, it very naturally and immediately drifted into being dialogue, just dialogue. And then I did the next scene, which was just dialogue. And then the next scene, which is just dialogue. And I'm sitting here, and I get to the point where they're actually going down to Elfheim, which is a decent ways into it. And I'm like, this is nothing but dialogue. So that stuck. So RFF1 is literally just dialogue. There's nothing but a traditional script there. Now, ironically, it doesn't really contain that much more in terms of lines than our Diablo did. But that's going to be a little bit different to edit and to process, and we've had to come up with other ways to visually present that, which Evo has been wonderfully helpful with. And we're going to have a new method of submitting lines, because usually the method we use, and we used all the way back in the theaters as well, is you have a line, and a line is defined as one uninterrupted block of text. So if you have a line that says, hi, then that's a line. And if you have a line that says, 7 years ago, I did a whole speech, then that is still one line, right? And that's how we kept track, and it helps me to have all that stuff labeled properly. But here we're going to do it per scene, and I did label and number each scene. I believe there's 30-something scenes. I can check right here real quick. So, in other words, what I'm going to ask of my actors is for them to record all of their lines within a given scene in one bundle. 33. 33 scenes. The first few scenes are kind of short. And then we get to Provoca. Anyways, so I wanted to tell you something, or I guess ask you something, Rex. It's more like tell you something. Because once upon a time in Discord, I mentioned that you had no idea what kind of writer I was. And you were like, no offense. And I'm like, no, I mean that literally. You have not seen, and you haven't watched World of Warcraft. And I don't think you actually watched the LTTV theater. So you've never seen anything I'd written. Now you've seen something I've written. So now I can actually say, okay, here's my chops. Here's my resume. Anyway, so I did have a question. Hang on, so let me scroll up. Why the choice to have a character use quite modern language? So that's something I actually bounced back and forth on. It is actually a deliberate choice, for the record. The reason I do that is because of a combination of understandability and relatability. So a trap, in my opinion, that several writers fall into is they try to be authentic too much. So they try to make something a little bit too in character, too in universe, too authentic. And if they do that, what they actually do is they tend to push the audience away. Now, there's obviously a gray line here, or a gray expanse here between too authentic and not authentic enough. If I had a character just walk around being like, yo, totally tubular, dude, then that would probably be too relatable, too modern, and it would just pull you completely out of the work. But if I have a character actually start speaking in proper older terminology, which you may not even recognize, even based on context, then all the audience is going to do is just going to be like, huh? And so I try to do a little bit of both. Like I said, it's kind of an in-the-middle thing. So trying to get this balance point of the audience being capable of actually understanding what's being said and being able to relate immediately and without thinking about it to what's being said, without it being completely jarring. I also went out of my way to make sure that specific characters would tend to say things like that. Isendra being the big example here. The whole idea here... I mean, I'm cool with the screenshot, Gary, but I don't have time to watch a live thing, if that's what you're asking. So Isendra was one of the big exceptions, because the whole idea is that Isendra is way more modern than most of these other people. And that was something I was trying to convey in her language, too. Sentence structure and word choice is so important for determining the different voice of a character. So Isendra, who is very capable and very competent about the nature of reality and how the fabric works and how the pillars work, and is basically an astrophysicist equivalent, uses language consistently that's a couple steps more modern than most of the other people do. She's also much more casual about it, but that's just because that grew naturally when I was writing the character. So anyways, I hope that answers you. Like I said, it was done quite deliberately. Also, if you're paying attention, Zool tends to do that too. He's a bright kid. Pretty young, but bright kid. Anyway, so, next question. I agree, by the way, Rax, about casting Garland. That's going to be... Garland... I don't want to give away too much, but Garland's actually going to be pretty hard to cast because of the other characters involved. No, Jeffrey, you actually did a very good job. Most people can't do Urianger speech smoothly. Most people stumble over it because that's not normal language to you, right? So it comes across a little bit more as reading a line of dialogue than saying a sentence. It's another layer of difficulty. It's one of the reasons I listed Jeffrey as one of the harder roles, is because he speaks that old-timey style. If you're paying attention, I did that very much on purpose, pretty much for the same reason Urianger does. Not everyone talks like that. He just talks like that as a specific choice. I mean, if you're paying attention, someone who was his friend, who was in the same troop as him, who was of the same faith and from the same place as him, is Joanna, who is super casual about her dialogue and her word choice, and she just has none of that, thee or thou speech going on. So, very much a deliberate point and purpose for him as a character. I apparently... My text is actually scrolling off the screen. If anybody asks any questions I missed, then I think I missed it at this point. I feel like there's at least 2 more questions in there. Killing You says, any tips for getting the file sizes down? Don't worry about it. Unless it's actually an issue, we can use Google Drive to transfer files. That's fun. Did Imperius get blindsided and that's how the demons got him? No, Imperius just got ground down. So the idea here, like I mentioned, there was a 9-year gap. And for about 8 of those years, Imperius was able to run his guerrilla campaign throughout the Hells and just kind of, you know, hit and runs, very carefully moving through the cracks and crevices within the burning Hells, never staying in one place for long. You get the idea. Eventually, they just caught up to him, and eventually they managed to slay him. But if you're curious, it was specifically Duriel who did the killing blow. Duriel was able to pull him down. Oh yeah, always make sure the quality of this file output is as high as you are capable of pushing it out. I know not everybody has a microphone and a proper recording setup and blah, 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 blah. I am a little bit picky on microphone quality and recording room quality, but I tend to have a gradient of pickiness. The more central a character is, the more lines they have, the more picky I'm going to be. That's pretty much universal. Never Giga Pudding. Exactly, Kara White Nose. It was always going to go wrong. Honestly, the whole point, the whole narrative point there, was that Imperius and Iswal managed that for 9 years, which is bonkers. It's one of the reasons why Tyrael was pushing so hard for going ahead and attacking now, because the Hells have not been this weak in centuries. Oh, one other thing. I do prefer, if you can, to give me a dual channel thing, stereo, instead of mono. If you don't, what I will do is I will take your mono file and duplicate it into fake stereo, because I need the files to be stereo files, even if they are not stereo audio. So I prefer stereo audio if I can get it. I'm not cussing, Giga Pudding. Gosh darn it. Oh my god. Okay, now I'm cussing. Just for Imperial Star Destroyer. Maybe I'm cussing at Imperial Star Destroyer. I'm not sure. It's one of the two. Something's going to happen here. I use a Blue Yeti, which is honestly as good as it's getting without getting into professional mics. And you're probably thinking, why not get a professional mic, Laura? First of all, professional mics are actually irritating to hook up to a computer. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is professional mics are really expensive. 4 digits on the low end. Didn't you just... Yes, you did. You literally just donated for these. Hang on. We're just going to add that to those. Make that easier for paperworking. And yeah, I don't actually have a home studio proper like. I have to do some really fun stuff. The ever-infamous blanket method in order to try and get my sound to sound decent. Because, well, I live in a one-bedroom apartment with all of the problems that implies. Yes, the Snowball is also perfectly acceptable, usually about half the price of the Yeti. Noticeably worse in quality, but still functional. That's still available. Thank you, Imperial Star Destroyer. I do always appreciate, and I will put that towards the same things. Thank you. Apparently the Blue Yeti is on sale right now. Yeah, see, part of the problem is, if this is going to sound like a weird thing, the USB format can only handle so much throughput, which means at a certain point, any USB mic is going to run into the cap of the USB cord. It literally cannot put the oh god, I can't think of the name all of a sudden. The oh my god, it can't get the blah through because it will run into the data cap. Bandwidth, thank you. That's actually not the word I was looking for. This is gonna bother me now. Hang on. Let's just pull a file into Audacity really quick. And then export the file. KBPS, that's the specific thing I was thinking of. KBPS. The bitrate, thank you. That's the term for the KBPS. So, The USB is going to run into that barrier at some point or another. Um, and that's what it is. There's nothing really to be done about that. In order to properly have a true analog recording, what would most likely I would have to do is I would either have to have a completely separate thing, which I analog dump data into digitally, and then digitally pull that data into my computer, or I would actually need another piece of hardware, which I then hook the new expensive mic into, and then that new piece of hardware would be able to then pull the data and I'd dump it in my computer, something like that, right? And I'll probably do that someday, but I still live in a one-bedroom apartment, so regardless of cost, there's not really a lot of reason to do that, because my recording studio kind of sucks, and there's nothing I can do about that. Anyways, so the Blue Yeti is more than acceptable for this. And I can do some playing with files when we get there. Yep, time for the ASMR, sorry. It's just me snoring. I feel like I had another question right at the end there, and I, of course, I've already lost it. Because Imperial Star Destroyer decided to destroy my blade. Hi, Eternus. It was very good. Something else I was going to share. Did I write it down by chance? I already talked about the production thing. I already talked about that. It's actually one other thing I was thinking about during the video I wanted to share. Because I want to get across a bit of the visuals, so my biggest fear with our Diablo is, and always has been, the fact that it's too good. Like, it's just too amazing. And I can't... I can't do that. No! Imperial Star Destroyer. Like, I cannot replicate that. It's not possible. It's not happening. So... what we're going to do... Yeah, exactly. We've set the bar so high in production value. The overall approach and style is actually going to be the same, but obviously the artwork is going to just be crushing it. I mean, they wouldn't try Hexian. My first reaction would be fear. Now, this is an in-progress thing. So give me one moment here. Just the one. I mean... what were you going to audition for, Roman Cure? Do you know? Because the main thing I want to lock away today is the 6 main roles. That's actually my goal for the day, is to lock down who's voicing the 6 main. Where is it? Where is it? There it is. Like Matoya, we can see that. It's cool. We'll get there. Given the constraints. Listen, I know my art, my editing and voice acting and everything is terrible, Evo. But you did a very good job, regardless of my terribleness. If you're gonna do some easy roles, don't worry about it too much. I almost always, in every project, including theaters and... whoops, that's the wrong thing. Including theaters and rewrites, is I usually approach the hard stuff first. That's my approach in everything, really. Okay, so a little bit of an idea of what our FF1 is going to look like. Obviously, this is not in motion, but this is a general concept. Now, this isn't going to be animated. Let me just say that right off the bat. I know how to animate it. I absolutely have access to the sprites and the time and the program. But animating this one screen would probably take me about 2 days to do. And that's... I talked about this in the pre-stream. One of the whole ideas here is that I simply cannot spend that much time in it. Yes, they are Traxia. So, instead, you'll be seeing something like this, and we'll be doing a bit of the slow pan idea. So the idea is the background will be slow panning. The text block at the bottom will just stay there. And what's going to happen is who's talking at any given point in time will be the portrait that's highlighted. So you see right now how Terra is highlighted, and so is Locke, but Edgar and Sabin are not. So that's how we'll go ahead and show visually who's talking during any given particular scene, is that they'll be lit up like that. And this is generally what our FF1 is going to look like. Again, this is actually not just a prototype, it's actually already out of date. But that's the concept. This one screen, by the way, is 71 objects. Just to further emphasize the time consumption thing here. What about NPCs? So we've actually thought about NPCs. There's actually a thing here. Give me a second here. I think it'll look good. It's not going to look like our Diablo. Nothing's going to look like our Diablo. That's bonkers. I am hopeful that Eva will be able to do some portraits for RFF1 for the stuff at the bottom, but I'm not going to expect it of her because I've already expected far too much of her. You have to give me a minute. Evo and I talk too much. Where was this? Oh my god, what day was that, Evo? Here we go, okay. So, alright. Here's the actual thing. Give me a second, I gotta actually do this. So, doing all the NPCs is something that might happen and probably won't. But it's already been something that's been considered. And the way it would look is something like this. So you can see the general idea. And you kind of get the overall thrust of the concept across. So the main 6, they'll be positioned better and all that fun stuff. And the NPCs, over on the right. I think this is the one you decided on? Hang on. There is one final option, and it's the one we're actually most likely to take. Because not only does it involve the least amount of time, but it will probably look the best visually, and that's to go back to the original option, where there are no portraits for NPCs. Because most NPCs don't have that much dialogue anyways. But more to the point, it helps to emphasize the main characters, who are very much the main characters. There are entire scenes in RFF1 where it's just 2 of the main characters talking to each other. It's actually a semi-frequent aspect of RFF1, actually. That's the most likely thing that's going to happen, is we're just going to have the blue window, which doesn't move, and shows the 6 portraits, and then we're going to have the overall background, which I've already had some help with designing the objects for, and I will be manually crafting each background myself, and, you know, doing probably the slow panning trick that I was already doing in our Diablo. The slow pan over portraits is kind of the overall aesthetic that we've settled on for the ReWrite project in general. There are a few things where we're not sure what we're going to do about lately at FF7, Star Wars. But that is going to be the overall visual look for most things. Any possibility of doing a text box to accommodate subtitles? So I mentioned this during the actual the video, which was going live earlier. Doing subtitles was something I automatically thought I was going to do for these. And in fact, I had started doing for our Diablo. It takes an insane amount of time to do subtitles properly. It's actually bizarre how much time it takes to do subtitles. Because it's not just writing down the script, it's writing down the script in a way that's formatted properly for the person who's talking at any given point in time, and then making sure that it scrolls properly. It's a whole thing. Yeah, I was saying, most people in chat probably are aware of that. And so I decided pretty quickly into our Diablo's production to just walk away from that. It's a thing. It's a whole thing. Actually, what's funny is they didn't Imperial Star Destroyer, not with Origins, but they did with something else. Anyways. So I got another question there. Assuming that all the voice acting was recorded separately, that is correct. I have actors in Australia, in Canada, in Britain, in Hungary, I think. I actually have a couple actors here in the States, too. I have actors absolutely all over the place. There's no joint recordings possible. Not really. So instead, what I usually do is I have them send me their lines, and I actually put them together and make it sound like they're talking in the same room and to each other. So that's all audio editing at that point. I don't want to oust anyone, Lineruf. But yeah, we have people from all over the place. And yeah, all the people in the States are all over the place too. If I have the Q power, one of the most mundane, stupid things I want to do is to be able to like visit people, teleport in and be like, hey, Lunaruth, what's up? And she'll be like, hey. We'll go out and have dinner. And then, like, get her in an actual recording studio and sit down, with the script and be like, all right, let's do this. And just have her talk in a professional actual recording booth and actually be with her while she's doing her lines. I know I'm good at that particular style of directing because that's how I do the directing for my sister. I'm usually sitting right there with her when she's doing her lines, like I was for her voicing Akarat. So if I could just... The problem is, practically speaking, it's completely impossible. It's way more expensive than you'd think to just hop around and do that kind of a thing. So that's not happening. But anyway, so that was that question. I think I saw another question. How do I direct this? So the usual way I do direction nowadays... So let me actually walk back. The directing process has changed a lot over the years. Actually, Discord voice calls, we tried that, Dragon's Hunter. It doesn't work. That's the simplest, easiest way I could possibly explain that. It doesn't actually work. It causes way too many issues, especially with regards to audio quality. I know we're recording MP3s, generally speaking, but it's... it's pretty bad. The audio balance is awful. The sound is terrible in terms of quality, and there's some other editing problems with it. You may or may not have actually heard some of those problems because we actually did some of the lines in FF9, the theater for FF9, in Discord calls, and I regret that horribly. Anyways, direction. So here's... originally, I just wrote up all the direction. That was a terrible idea. Let me be clear about that. I wrote director's notes for every line of dialogue in Final Fantasy IX. It's one of the reasons, this is not a joke, it's one of the reasons why the FF9 theater took 4 goddamn years to get through. Is because in addition to doing timestamps for every line or every bundle of lines, I had to then do director's notes for all of those lines. It took a while. So we don't do that anymore. Starting, I want to say in Undertale, we started doing this other thing where I started actually recording. So now there's the director's videos. And so far, everyone likes the director's videos a lot, and I'm very happy about that, and that's good because it's going a lot better. Yeah, exactly, Dragon's Hunter. But think FF9. Yeah, I had like paragraphs of direction for Queen Braun. But yeah, nowadays what I do is I say, okay, so this is the director's video for X character. So the first thing I usually do is I talk... This is my style of direction. I don't mind sharing this. This is the kind of director I am. The first thing I do is I talk about your character. Your past, your history, your mentality, rather than doing something, and I'm going to do this deliberately because George Lucas is a terrible director, rather than saying, you need to be more Jedi-like, or you need to be angry, what I will say is, so what just happened to you is you have just decided to go ahead and allow your friend to sacrifice themselves. And at the moment, you allowed it to pass, like in the moment. You were willing to let it go because they were convincing and you needed someone to go. And as much as you wished it would be you, they were the one willing to take that hurt. But now that that moment has passed, all you have is thoughts. Was that the right thing to do? Was that the right way to put that? Maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have gone in some other different direction with it. Gosh, maybe I should have... And I'm sorry, and now I'm being distracted by my mother, but you get the idea. That's how I tend to direct. I give you your history, your backstory, why you are reacting in the way that you're reacting, that kind of a thing. Sorry, give me a minute. And that's how I tend to direct. Having said that, I do, every now and again, I do say I want a specific tone for a specific line. Because, let me use a direct example. So with RFF1, for the first time, I allowed people... See how I'm killing you. I allowed people to proof the script before it was finalized. And there was one line that several people hated. 3 or 4 people all were like, this line sucks. So, when I did the director's video for the character in question, which is the Red Mage, I emphasized this exact line because I knew people were going to have questions about it. With fortune, venture will swiftly provide me proper means to properly repay Elder Matoya. because the line was written very deliberately to be said in a certain cadence and pacing, right? Because obviously I'm the one who wrote it. You get the idea. So usually it's all about context, perspective, and mentality. And then I'll go into things like, okay, here's how I want this to sound. And that's my directing style. And that's how I get the directions out. I'm like, okay, here's the script. Here's my directions. Thanks to, I believe it's Dragon's Hunter, who actually gave timestamps per directing video per scene. So that'll be very helpful there as well. Oh, and another thing about director's videos, I tend to be a bit of a physical person as well. And so I tend to like to actually act out moments as I'm telling them, which I also encourage my actors to do because I found that physicality tends to help with voice acting. She actually wanted a link to it, Giga Pudding. She's going to hate it, but, you know. So how many takes do I prefer people to send? I don't think I have a preference, really. That's how I'm going to answer that. I don't think I actually have a preference. Some people will send me, like, 18 takes, like Syldir or Lunaruth. Some people send me, like, 1 or 2, like Kitsune Baba or Carefree Callie or Random. Some people just send me 1 take. All of these are acceptable. All of these are totally fine. Whichever one it is you do, I can pretty much always make it work. And if you send 1 take and I don't like it, then I will say so. I'm not much of a dick of a director, but I absolutely have no problem saying, hey, so this sucks. I need you to redo this. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. It's really what it boils down to. I'm looking forward to RFF1, as weird as that may sound, now that, you know, that I'm basking in the glow of our Diablo. This is going to be an interesting one. So another thing several people kept asking is a semi-recurring thing is someone will have a line. So Bob has a line, and then Bobette has 2 lines, but they're listed separately, and they're like, why is this? It's because the first line is actually being said during/over the previous line. That'll all be in editing, of course. So, you know, like, you're like, really? You counted? Is something you're going to say in the background while they're saying, if you haven't said but 18 words to me in the last week, you know. So formatting is a little bit different in some cases. Yeah, it's effectively designed like a screenplay. My sister was making fun of me for this too, because I was trying to describe the format of this, because this is actually very unusual writing for me, and she's like, so you just wrote, you know, lore, or because she totally calls me lore, you just wrote a script, you wrote a screenplay, and I'm like, what? Yeah, no, I guess I did. Which original line of dialogue am I most proud of? I would have made a damned good baker. That line is literally the entirety of our Diablo in 1 line. The whole story. One of the reasons I was so picky with Natalia is she is literally the emotional fulcrum of the entire work. If you'll notice, she's the one who first raises a concern about what's going on. She's the one who has the most violent actual reaction to it. And she's the one who is the most down-to-earth. Most of the other main characters in our Diablo are, in one direction or another, you know, big, strong, heroic figures. You know, the towering Amazon and the skilled necromancer and the brilliant mage. Natalia has a couple of daggers and some experience killing mages. That's it. In game terms, the idea is that Natalia is actually much lower level than everyone else, too. But she thus has the most down-to-earth perspective on all of this. And so her whole thing about the baker, as I mentioned, is one of the original plot points of the entire work. Her entire focus on being a baker was the crux, the literal crux of the entire story. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best line I wrote in our Diablo, specifically. The second one is probably, and I know several people caught this, who do you think sacrificed for your stone? I always was worried. I was always worried because the nature of how artifacts are crafted is a very common, it's very central to the story of our Diablo. But I only actually explain it once, right at the beginning, by Mephisto. And I was always worried, every time I kept wanting to re-add like another exposition scene where someone else reiterated how artifacts work. And I kept being like, no, lore, no, bad. Trust in your audience. Trust that they'll pick up on it. Because it's such an important thing. But, yeah, the idea that the angels are just kind of okay with the nature of it, because obviously it makes sense. Like, again, it's not evil. Mephisto is the kind of person who would shove people screaming into a pit to make his soul stone, which is what he did. What the angels did is they gathered Haradrim and said, we seek willing sacrifice. We seek people who are willing to sacrifice themselves to save your world, to be able to help it join together with the high heavens. But both of them are totally cool with making those and using them. If you're paying attention, only one of all of the humans is totally cool with artifacts. And that's Cool, who is definitely going to have a role in our Diablo 2. I made it a recurring point that he would speak about artifacts and their creation and their design without, like, a hint of anything. Like it never bothered him at all. Why would it? He's always a little bit more zoomed out, is his perspective. Anyways, any other questions? Because I probably should break for lunch soon. And I gotta get auditions. I gotta make auditions work. Listen, I know you're purely evil, Gigapooter. Which interactions were the most fun to write? So, one of the things I did to challenge myself as a writer was I specifically wanted to have... Okay, let me... do you mind if I rewind here for a second? Generally speaking, I only need your auditions to be a few lines, Roman Kier. And I'm glad some of you enjoyed the rewrite, by the way. Only like 2 of you, though. My writing, for years, has lent itself towards 2 big things. Politics and war. Now, I'm very good at that. That's something that I've had solidity on in terms of my own confidence for decades. I can write a political story. I can do it in my sleep. So, one of the things I've been trying to task myself with and pushing myself is trying to write things that are not politics and war. There's still definitely some politics and war in this story, but way more in the background. Over there. So the scene, to go back to the specific question, which was the interaction that was most fun to write, the scene at the inn, at Leah's Inn, in Lutko Lane, probably my overall favorite interaction to write in our Diablo specifically. Because the whole thing just gelled perfectly. The way that each of there's already Joanna and Karazim there. They're just recouping, literally about to head west across the pass in order to go reach Eastgate Keep and figure out what the hell's going on with Aiden. Magda, who was working for Tyrael, shows up with Nazebo and Vala. It's like, all right, hey. And of course they go to the most prolific and commonly trafficked inn in order to settle, the one that's being personally backed by Lord Jaren, right? So it makes perfect sense that these 2 groups get together. It makes sense that they're here at roughly the same time, especially since they would have run at each other on the road, even if they didn't. But as they're sitting in the inn, I wanted it to just be a breather scene. I wanted it to be primarily just the characters chatting and interacting with each other. And I think that's probably the best interaction scene I wrote in our Diablo specifically. Now, the scene that floored me the most when the lines came in, that's the Crux scene. The scene at the end of Act 4 of D2. Did you notice I did a lot to make that scene distinguished. There's no music the entire scene. There's no background visuals. And Ariel is just towering over everyone else the entire scene. I can actually picture in my head like what kind of camera angles I would use for the Crux scene in like a full 3D gameplay sort of a thing. And that scene turned out really well. What's funny is, of course, goodbye, Evo. What's funny, of course, is I get lines not in any order, right? I get lines when the actors finish them. So I would get like one bit of dialogue and then another bit of dialogue and another bit of dialogue, and it's funny from the editor's perspective just seeing the scene very, very slowly and completely out of order be slowly put together. But I mentioned this, and I'm not trying to say anything negative, Lunaruth, so please don't take it that way. But the last lines I got for the Crux scene were from Lunaruth. So I want you to imagine from my perspective, not even having Ariel for the majority of editing that scene together. Once I finally got her lines in, it was just, you know, the whole thing just blew me away. It turned out almost perfectly. Most of the big moment scenes landed exactly how they should, and I'm very happy about that. How many of you noticed that the second layer of clouds only showed up when Ariel died at Mount Ariat? Just idly curious. So I didn't see it, Eternus. I'm sorry. If you want to repeat it, Eternus, I'll feel free to answer it. Linnarith says, what do I think about the fact that in popular media, having just a straight-up philosophical discussion is almost always regarded as bad writing or is not done? It's okay. I know, Linnarith. I'm not trying to pressure you. You can take a step back with RFF1 if you want. Because, you know, 6 rolls. Although I'm actually looking forward to hearing your Matoya. I'm sorry, one moment. A whole year? Question mark. That's crazy! Exclamation mark. I hope you have other books for the next year then, period. So, words. I had exactly one complaint about your lines, Cord. You had this tendency to say, what? And it worked the first time, but the second time it didn't quite work. And you actually gave me a couple of takes on that, and I just couldn't get it workable. I finally just said, screw it. It's the only complaint I had, otherwise you did a really good job. We need to get you to voice all the villains, apparently, Cord. That's your new shtick instead of being the narrator. So, big discussion scenes. I think part of the problem, Linnarith, is the argument, which I don't agree with, by the way, is that real people don't talk that way, right? And that's a lie. And I could say that because I've had discussions like that in real life with friends and with family. Having those moments where you just kind of get off on a philosophical tangent is a thing. Now, I do think it needs to flow dynamically and naturally from the events that are happening in the narrative. That's something I've seen done wrongly. Now, I hate... Rax is going to kill me here. I love FF14 quite a bit. And I very much enjoy a lot of the Endwalker storyline specifically. But one of the big complaints I kept having over and over was every now and again the characters would just suddenly decide out of nowhere to start getting all philosophical. And the problem wasn't the fact that they were getting all philosophical. It was, imagine you're going to the grocery store and someone picks up an apple. It's like, you think we should get some apples? The other person says, I feel like apples are indicative of the confluence of reality, and maybe our consciousness is not something that is projected upon us, but rather, and then the person who picks up the apple just goes right with it. Of course, I believe that life is something that grows from, and then they go and they buy the apple. That was my problem with it, not the philosophical part, but the fact that they just kind of jumped into it and jumped out of it. What? But anybody who's seen some of the good stuff of Trek knows that a lot of some of the actual best scenes across all of Star Trek tends to be when two characters are just chatting about a topic or a thing and just acting off each other, right? So that's my answer to you, Linnarith. Do I have placeholders for editing? I do, actually. Usually visual stuff. So in our Diablo specifically, you know how their lines popped up? Sorry, not their lines. Their names would pop up to indicate who's talking at any given point in time. I used those to space things because I can actually physically have that here. And it's like, so that's before I even actually took in a single line. I spaced out the entire script in terms of their names so that each line would be in order. That's how I kept everything, kept track of everything. That's why I kept asking people to number their lines, like I bugged poor Linnarith about, because that's how I was keeping track. There's another question in there somewhere. Scroll. How many angels actually understand humanity? I'm gonna go with none of them. I think we'll go with none. Listen, their lions are all over the place, Cord. Rar. I feel like I missed a question. Other than the one that Eternus I don't think is actually repeated. I've completely missed it. I don't see it, no. Sorry. If you asked it, go ahead and quick. Pete! Quick! Damn you, Giga Pudding. Alright, I'm not saying a question. I hope y'all enjoyed. I really do. I hope you're going to enjoy FF1 when we get there. The rough plan at the moment, I mentioned this during the pre-stream, is it's going to be FF1, probably FF2, and FF3. So the FF2 outline is already done. And a lot of the prep work on FF3 is already done as well. So those are probably going to happen first. So FF1, FF2, FF3. Then the most likely next one is going to be the first Star Wars video, because we're going to be breaking up Star Wars videos per era. And that's going to rely on some stuff to happen, but the current goal is for The Mandalorian Crusade, which is going to be the first era of Star Wars, to go live. After that, I've deliberately not thought about it. I've been trying to push that forward because I'm already working on 4 ReWrite projects simultaneously. So we'll get there. We'll get there. But anyways, I do hope you've enjoyed. I do hope you continue to enjoy. Monday, we'll be playing more Diablo 3, possibly answering more our Diablo questions. And otherwise, I'm going to go get some food.